Shalom, my friends from here in Jerusalem. I want to explain to you what's happening because you might see that the world is calling France and America is calling Israel and Hezbollah to a ceasefire, and it's critical that you understand why is the world calling for a ceasefire now. Let's go back a little bit. 2006 was the Second Lebanon War. During the Second Lebanon War, Hezbollah launched thousands of rockets on Israel. Israel didn't have the Iron Dome, and it was a horrible situation for Israel, meaning you had millions of people living in their bomb shelters and there was no Iron Dome and missiles falling everywhere. How did the Second Lebanon War in 2006 end? Well, it ended because we came to a UN agreement. There was a UN agreement that Hezbollah, who are Iranian-backed terror group, it's an Iranian-backed terror group started in 1985 by Khomeini, not to stand up for the Palestinians, but in order to expand Iran's power and to try to choke Israel from Lebanon. And so they were started, this terror group, in 1985 by Khomeini. They've been launching missiles and threatening war and destruction on Israel since then. In 2006, there was a big war, and there was an agreement at the UN that the Hezbollah terrorists wouldn't be on Israel's border, like where they were, but they would go back behind the Litani River. This is how the war ended. So for a little bit after 2006, the Hezbollah terrorists moved beyond the Litani River and in Lebanon, and UN peacekeeping forces moved into that place in between the Israeli cities and the Litani River. But very quickly, the Hezbollah terrorists moved back on the other side of the Litani River than they were supposed to be on, and moved all the way up to Israel's border. Right before October 7th, I was in Metula, which is an Israeli town on the border with Lebanon, and I saw Hezbollah terrorists. I saw Hezbollah terrorists set up their bases on Israel's border, less than a mile from Israeli cities. Now, starting on October 8th, you had the 7th of October and October 8th, Hezbollah terrorists backed by Iran started launching rockets every day and suicide drones into Israel. So many drones and missiles that they had to evacuate over 80,000 residents from northern Israel. This means about 1/3 of the entire country of Israel have been living as evacuees for the past year. Children don't have school, parents don't have businesses, living as evacuees for a year. I don't need to tell you how horrible that is. And that means that Hezbollah terrorists have basically won in evacuating Israel. Now, either Israel moves the Hezbollah terrorists from our border, or the people of Israel can't go back to their homes. It means that basically we gave up 1/3 of this tiny country that's anyways the size of New Jersey. So for the past year, Israel has been in very intense negotiations trying to get the Hezbollah terrorists away from our border using diplomatic means, not using war, but using diplomatic means. Israel, for a year straight, has been reaching out to America and the UN and Europe and directly to the Lebanese people even, saying find a diplomatic solution to move the Hezbollah terrorists from Israel's border. Otherwise, we are going to go to war and destroy the Hezbollah terrorists and their rocket capabilities. For a year, no one paid attention. No one worked with Israel to find a diplomatic solution. Hezbollah terrorists barely even responded. I'll tell you how they responded: by launching rockets and missiles and drones into Israel on a daily basis. For the past year, we've had sometimes over 200 rockets launched into Israeli cities by Hezbollah terrorists. There was no diplomacy then. They didn't want diplomacy then. Israel said, we are giving a certain amount of time to diplomacy to try to get the Hezbollah terrorists away from our borders, away from our cities. Otherwise, we are going to take military means in order to move them physically away from our borders. For a year, Israel tried to do this diplomatically, and it didn't work. No one wanted to work with Israel on this, including the Hezbollah terrorists. Now, finally, it got to a point after a year that Israel said, we cannot sustain hundreds of rocket and drone attacks on our Israeli cities for over a year, every single day, including a fellowship soup kitchen that had a direct hit by one of these Hezbollah missiles. We need to move them militarily and get them away from Israel's border in whatever means necessary. And so, as you've seen over the past week or so, Israel has been bombing the Hezbollah terrorists, their missiles. We bomb what looks like a house, and you see the videos that missiles come launching out of the house because they've been storing missiles inside of what looks like homes. So Israel right now is destroying the capabilities of Hezbollah to attack Israel as much as possible, disrupting the communication with the Hezbollah terrorists. And suddenly now, when Israel is finally taking the military means that any other country would have taken a long time ago to move these terrorists from our border, suddenly now that Israel is in a position of moving them away from our border and destroying their missiles, suddenly now the world is saying, let's try diplomacy. Let's have a ceasefire. Let's try to talk. I'll tell you something. This is what the Israeli people feel like. What does it look like when we sit and try to have diplomacy with the terror group? This is what it looks like. They say, we want to destroy Israel. Israel says, we don't want to be destroyed. And neither are willing to compromise on that. And so when you have one side that won't compromise on wanting to destroy the other side, and the other side that just won't compromise on not being destroyed, you see what's happening now. And so when the world is calling for a ceasefire to try to talk, I want you to understand what that means. Israel has been trying to talk, to have diplomacy, to move these terrorists away from our border for a year. And in response, we've had thousands of rockets on Israeli cities. Now that Israel is finally defending the cities, is finally destroying the missile capabilities, is finally destroying the suicide drones, is finally disrupting the communication of these terrorists, suddenly now the world says, oh, let's have a ceasefire and talk. So we'll see what happens. From here in Jerusalem, I'm about to go and pray. I have half an hour of meditation and prayer before I have my next meeting that I'm very excited for. And I'm going to be praying for God to put in the leaders' hearts exactly what's supposed to be to bring peace. And there are two ways that peace can come. Number one is if Hezbollah miraculously says, we're going to stop trying to destroy Israel and we'll give up our weapons and we'll give up our rockets that we've been targeting Israel with. That's one way to bring peace, and that would definitely bring peace. The second way is if Israel destroys them militarily, moves this terror group from away from Israel's border, protects the entire free world by breaking up the communication of this terror group, and recognizes that sometimes, especially in the Middle East, it's only force that's able to bring peace. And as we say in Hebrew, as we say in the scriptures, Hashem oz le'amo yiten, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. God comes in a form of strength. God blesses his nation with peace. And so from here in Jerusalem, join me in praying for peace. Join me that all the strength that we've used thus far will lead to days of peace. Join me in praying for the peace of Jerusalem and believing that it's possible. We don't always have to be in conflict. We don't always have to be in war. God can change the hearts of our enemies in a second. And the second they put down their weapons is the second there will be peace. The second they stop wanting to destroy Israel is the second that there'll be peace. Israel is reaching out our hands for peace. We've made peace through the Abraham Accords with other Arab countries who have said, okay, we'll stop trying to destroy you. We want to work together. And that day, Israel said, let's do it. And since then, we've had peace with those countries. It's possible. It's a reality that I believe is not too big for God. And we have to just pray that all the hearts of our enemies will turn back to God, will turn to peace. And the day that they turn away from violence, away from killing, away from evil, is the day that the entire world will know peace. Israel is on the front lines of this war. We are protecting the sanctity of life, Judeo-Christian values. We're protecting freedom. We're protecting democracy. And we will do whatever we need to do in order to make sure that this evil doesn't take over. If you found this interesting, enlightening, educational, inspiring, share it, because we need the world to understand, beyond the headlines, what Israel is facing. From here in Jerusalem, shalom.